Hope this starts the stream. I'm back at the courthouse at 500 Pearl Street, where we've just heard the oral arguments, latest hearing in the case of Giuffre versus Dershowitz, and it looks like Mr. Dershowitz has exited the court and is standing there. Let's see what we can hear. Whoops, that's not good.
Subject to being sued for defamation. I am saying to you, I never met Virginia Giuffre. I never had sex with her. And the reason I'm saying it, it's because it's true. She, on the other hand, Virginia Giuffre, has never and will never stand in front of anyone and repeat her lie saying that she did have sex with him. She knows if she repeats it, she knows if she repeats it, she will be sued for defamation. So I think each of you has a responsibility to ask her to repeat in front of the media her false charge. I don't believe she will ever do it. Any questions?
Can you talk about Les Wexner? You plan on calling Les Wexner?
Les Wexner will be a major witness, and we will prove that Sigrid McCauley and David Boies went to Les Wexner's lawyers and said that Les Wexner had sex with Virginia Giuffre between 5 and 10 times, and that Les Wexner insisted that she wear Victoria's Secret type lingerie. And I can't imagine any reason for having that conversation unless it was part of an effort to obtain money. And so we will call Les Wexner as a witness, we will call Sigrid McCauley as a witness, we will call David Boies, we will call Les Wexner's lawyer. And our goal is simply to have the entire whole truth come out. Virginia Giuffre and David Boies have done a terrible disservice to a great movement, the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement relies on credible reports of sexual misconduct. And when a woman and her lawyer make false allegations and falsely accuse people, it hurts not only the falsely accused person, me, but it hurts everybody who is a true victim of sexual abuse because it takes away the credibility. And it's a terrible shame that that Giuffre has hurt the movement and that her lawyers have hurt this movement.
Alan, why did you ask her to sue you? You asked her to do that publicly, and then you said you welcomed it, so now why are you trying to toss it out?
There's a competing balance between inviting the lawsuit and putting forth First Amendment offenses, which we think are dispositive, which are important for reason and everything. And let me just say that this is a lawyer's argument, and it's important. And it stands separate aside Professor Dershowitz defending himself against this, what he believes in his court as a false allegation. So you cannot be faced with this situation and let the First Amendment die on it.
But he could vindicate himself by going through with it, and I thought that's what he wanted to do.
He could vindicate himself by talking as he is now, denying the allegations and making clear that he's telling the truth.
I want to do both. I want to vindicate my First Amendment right to be able to say, till the day I die, that I never met Virginia Giuffre, I never had any sexual encounter with her, and that she knows that. I want to say that, and I will say it to the day I die. And when I die, my wife will be here. And when she dies, my children will be here. I'm placing my bar card, which I earned 55 years ago on placing my bar card on the table because I will swear under oath that I never met this woman, knowing full well that if it would prove that I were saying anything false, I would lose my bar card and I would lose my liberty and my freedom. I predict that if this case goes to trial, perjury will be committed in this courtroom because I will swear unequivocally I never met this woman, and if she says that she ever met me and never had sex with me, she will be committing perjury. And that's why I've invited the FBI to attend the trial and to listen to our testimony and to decide who is committing perjury. It's not me.
Alan, in March you said you didn't know Mike Cernovich, but you were in a documentary that he made.
I don't know him though.
But you were in a documentary that he
I've been in
made.
thousands
You were
of
photographed
documentaries.
with him.
I've never had a lengthy conversation. I don't really know him.
What do you think that the judge just ordered the release of the transcript of this recording that you made?
I'm thrilled.
Were you going to release it to the public? Will you release the recording of your conversation with David Boies to the public?
It will come out, of course. Yeah.
All right. There's Alan Dershowitz. I don't know if that was easily heard.
Okay. Bit of a difficult sound situation here. Alan Dershowitz still claiming he doesn't know Mike Cernovich. Let's see what everybody else keeps asking. Why do you think the FBI is not pursuing Ghislaine Maxwell? It's the legal team. And there he goes. Not much to say. So the story remains the same, which I suppose is to be expected. We did not have Virginia Giuffre in the courthouse there.
Is he famous?
Sorry?
Is he famous or something, the guy?
He's Alan Dershowitz. He's a well-known law professor, and he's been accused of, he was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. He was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. He's been accused of having sex with one of the victims.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, indeed. Anyway, so just getting everything kind of packed up here. The one-man show, always difficult. So wanted to give people a little overview of what just went down there at the oral arguments hearing in the latest round of Giuffre versus, boy, this thing's going all over the place. These stabilizers are usually crappy and don't work for very long. I don't think they're really meant for the type of use I put them through. This one keeps going to the left. Anyway, so oral arguments. So basically, people are asking why Alan Dershowitz has put in this motion to dismiss if he's so confident in his innocence. And I mean, we can only speculate, but I presume it's because he doesn't want to have to, pay a ton of lawyers and go to court all the time. I'm always confused as to why someone who is a lawyer hires all those other lawyers, particularly since Dershowitz was sitting in the court, basically prompting, at times, pretty directly and overtly prompting Mr. Ansari, one of the members of his legal team, as to exactly what to say to the judge. I've never been in a courtroom that this judge was presiding over before, and I'll say she had a good sense of humor. She seemed to be quite fair. The hearing opened with the judge pretty much slamming Dershowitz's legal team. It's interesting. I'm becoming quite interested in observing these court proceedings. It's a bit like a boxing match. The Dershowitz team came out in the first round not that strong. His lawyer was citing case law from cases not in New York, and I took some notes, but my hands are full right now. I can't even read them. And it's a defamation case, basically. Alan Dershowitz, as we hopefully just heard, I realize the audio wasn't great. I will have an updated version on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth after I get back later. I have a separate audio recorder that hopefully will have picked up Mr. Dershowitz a little bit more clearly, but the crux of this case is that Alan Dershowitz has said that Virginia Giuffre is a liar and a perjurer, and that she was trying to extort Les Wexner, and that he claims, I didn't know this, but Alan Dershowitz claims to have a recorded conversation with David Boies. So David Boies is the high-powered lawyer whose firm is now representing Virginia Giuffre, one of the, I think she was the first Jeffrey Epstein victim to speak out, and she's been certainly one of the most publicized. Ms. Giuffre is an adult now, but all this activity took place when she was underage. And it's interesting because this recorded conversation with David Boies, there was a lot of back and forth speaking about the legal ethics of a lawyer recording a conversation with another lawyer. It's interesting how much lawyers dislike being recorded, but Alan Dershowitz says that he was not acting in his capacity as a lawyer during the time that he recorded the call. And I have to say, that seemed like a valid argument. He was seeking to be represented by the Boies firm at one time. And another key issue that came up during this oral arguments hearing was that Alan Dershowitz was in communication with an attorney at the Boies firm named, I believe, Sayers is what they said, Carlos Sayers. And there was an email exchange that was read into the record where Sayers said they're looking forward to representing Dershowitz, and Dershowitz confirmed that. And so there's a matter where if a person has reasonable cause to believe that they're represented by an attorney, that there exists, attorney-client privilege in certain factors, including, don't release confidential information. Basically, what's happening now is Alan Dershowitz is trying to disqualify the Boies firm as representatives for Virginia Giuffre, which would dismiss the case, or I guess she'd have to get another lawyer, but that's basically what Dershowitz is trying to do right now, is to say that the Boies law firm should not be able to represent Virginia Giuffre because Dershowitz, after that statement where Carlos Sayers said, "We're looking forward to representing you," Alan Dershowitz forwarded him a confidential memorandum that's pertinent to the case. They also raised the interesting point that Mr. Dershowitz would intend to call several attorneys from the Boies law firm as witnesses in this case, which is interesting. And I will say that despite, from the boxing match sort of analogy, despite the fact that the Dershowitz team seemed to come out not so strong in the beginning, I would say that the judge was extremely fair, because I felt like she was kind of really beating up the Dershowitz representatives, but she did it very fairly also to the lawyers from the boys' law firm towards the end. It seemed like, I have to say, Mr. Dershowitz's team raised some legal points that seemed quite valid. I think the acceptance of this confidential memorandum is problematic. The opposing counsel should not have access to that sort of thing. The fact that Sires apparently said, "We're looking forward to representing you," before they did a check to see if there was a conflict of interest, that seems like a problem. The judge raised the matter that there needs to be a discussion of the fee and an approval by the senior partner. And then Dershowitz's guys argued that, even in cases where it's being done pro bono, this has happened. And the judge said, right, but pro bono is essentially a fee agreement. They're agreeing to do it for free. She made the point that there was no fee agreement in place here. So it's interesting, these legal battles, because I think that lay people think that whatever the law is, you just show up in court and say, hey, I didn't break the law, and you're okay. But it's really not the case. We see that the nuance is unbelievable. The interpretation is almost, unending. And there always seems to be some way for lawyers to come up with something else to argue about, but it's necessary. I'm not criticizing the law. People always like to ask me when I go to these court cases if there was a gold fringed flag in the courtroom, and there was, but again, I'm not directly familiar with all the details of what that means, something with the SES and the court being a corporation. My impression of sitting there for an hour and a half is that this judge seems very fair, very intellectually sharp. She had a good sense of humor. She was ribbing the attorneys on both sides. Definitely got laughter from the courtroom when she kind of mocked them a little bit. So we'll have to see what happens. Dershowitz, again, is trying to get this case dismissed. Another argument that was made was that because these statements of defamation were initially made in 2015, when they were restated in 2018, because they were the same, that it doesn't count as defamation. Again, the key being that because there's been so much coverage in this case, the statement that Mr. Dershowitz made alleging that Virginia Giuffre is a liar, a perjurer, and an extortionist, those were already out and had worldwide coverage. So he alleges that repeating them does not reactivate the statute of limitations, which is, of course, one of the elements that the Virginia Giuffre case relies on. They actually spoke about Dershowitz restating these things in 2019 and asking to be sued. Now, I'm not sure if that was the interview the last time I spoke to Alan Dershowitz in March of 2019, where I asked him a question that prompted him to basically dare his accusers to sue him. And I think that's what they were referring to. Could have been some other statement that Mr. Dershowitz made, but right now I hope people heard, but he doubled down that he said that he really didn't know Mike Cernovich, that he had appeared in this documentary, but he appears in a lot of documentaries. It's very difficult to say if Mr. Dershowitz is being honest or not. I mean, he is obviously a very experienced and skilled legal strategist who has years, decades. He said he's had his law license for 55 years. So this is a guy that knows legal strategy inside and out. He obviously has represented some really, people that a lot of people don't hold in very high regard. O.J. Simpson, Klaus von Bülow. He's, and, I was watching a Lee Stranahan broadcast the other day. Obviously, everybody needs a lawyer. And I think when somebody becomes a criminal defense attorney, they do it because they recognize that everybody deserves a legal defense. Everybody deserves to be innocent until proven guilty. And if everybody, including lawyers, just made up their minds about people based on what they saw on the news or allegations or whatever, then nobody would ever get a fair trial, and that's obviously not what anybody wants. So it's very complicated, and I think we all need to be super sensitive to this evolving problem where, because information spreads so quickly, everybody forms a sort of expert opinion on every matter with, you know, very limited and even possibly fake news as their only source of information. So the other thing I would say is that sitting in this hearing, it was super interesting because you get so many details. I didn't know that Dershowitz had sought representation from the Boys firm, and that David Boys and Alan Dershowitz had had this conversation that's been recorded. I asked him if it would be released. He says it will. Obviously, Alan Dershowitz thinks that that recorded conversation exonerates him, and that, you know, some question as to the legal ethics of recording it. The judge raised, I forget the rule, I wrote it down, but a legal ethics rule that I guess prevents lawyers from recording each other without consent. And, you know, Mr. Dershowitz, this was the first time I realized that he was in the courtroom. He very quickly and kind of loudly prompted Mr. Ansari, one of his attorneys, to tell the judge that he was doing it as a client, not as an attorney. And I have to say that does feel like a valid argument. And again, great insight into just how sharp the legal mind of Alan Dershowitz is, whether you approve of what he's doing or not. So the two sides of this are, it seems, Alan Dershowitz is either telling the truth, in which case Virginia Giuffre is trying to frame him for a pretty serious and horrendous crime that, if he's telling the truth, he didn't do, or Alan Dershowitz is lying, and Alan Dershowitz is trying to avoid going to jail. Maybe he's weighed the options and getting disbarred is worth it to him, or I don't know that he will get disbarred. Perhaps even if he's lying, he's got some way of getting by on that, but we'll see. So I was waiting outside there for a little while because they went into the judge's chambers to discuss these confidential documents and to maintain the confidentiality of the documents. That was done behind closed doors, and neither the public nor the press were allowed in there. Now wait a minute, I'm getting a little turned around here. So didn't get to hear what was said about that, but the judge did order Alan Dershowitz's legal team to file with the clerk of the court the transcript of the phone call. So certainly the judge was interested in seeing that. And minute to minute, it was very interesting to see the judge's demeanor change as different arguments were raised and different things were said. So we'll have to see what happens. It's an ongoing thing. Virginia Giuffre was not in the courtroom today. Alan Dershowitz was. Apparently, Miss McCauley, one of the attorneys from the Boise firm who is representing Virginia Giuffre, was also present for this phone call. So she is going to be called as a witness by Dershowitz's legal team as well. It's pretty wild. I don't know what to say about that. I don't know if there's too many other cases where the opposing counsel are called as attorneys. I mean, I'm sure there are, but interesting developments nonetheless. Anyway, wanted to come down here and see what was going on with that. Got to ask Alan Dershowitz a few questions, which was interesting. I set this all up really on the fly, so I apologize if the sound wasn't great, and I hope that the live stream began on YouTube when I started. I had it scheduled for noon, so that might have thrown off our Patreon viewers, but what I'm going to do is go put in the superior audio and re-upload the video to Patreon. So if you're watching on Patreon and you missed the beginning of this, hang tight for just a little bit. There's going to be a special upgraded presentation for sponsors on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Now is a great time to get on there and become a sponsor. We're going to have another episode of More Pain tonight at 8 p.m. It's going to be a very special episode, including the full video of Michael and I. We traveled last Saturday to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to try to speak to Andrew McCabe, but in an extremely cowardly fashion. Mr. McCabe employed really remarkable measures to avoid us, and I'll tell you, upon reviewing the video, I noticed a lot more things than I had initially seen as far as possible FBI countermeasures to what we were doing there. Totally bizarre. So people should definitely tune in at 8 p.m. for More Pain. Patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and patreon.com/truepundit. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'll see you later today.